door, and he can see the look on my face, and he's like, holy shit, what's going on? And I said, he knows my brother, and I said, Kieran killed himself, and I just like kind of collapsed in his arms, and he kind of like held me close for a while, and he's like, what are you gonna do? And I was like, I'm getting the fuck out of here.
This episode is brought to you by Trident Coffee, the veteran-owned brand where every sip inspires you to live life full steam ahead. At Trident, they are more than just coffee. They are storytellers. It's crafted by veterans. Their instant cold brew is perfect for those who serve, those who have served, and anyone who values wellness. Featuring natural ingredients like organic mushrooms, adaptogens, and nootropics, it's more than just a morning pick-me-up. It's your new wellness ritual. Enjoy it at home or on the go, wherever your day takes you. Trident Coffee isn't just about great-tasting coffee. It's about empowering you to be the healthiest version of yourself, because great veterans make great citizens. Try their instant cold brew coffee today and taste the freedom of wellness. Remember, when you choose Trident, you're not just choosing coffee. You're choosing a path of connection through health and wellness. Use promo code DTD15 for 15% off your order. Hey guys, welcome back to the DTD podcast, Dynamic Tales Delivered. This week we got a special one for you. I got a call from my friend, Hoot Van Oosteen, and you guys have seen him before on the show, and he told me he just went on this retreat, and he had an amazing time. He really worked through some of the stuff that he was working through. This week, scout sniper, infantry assaultman, combat marksmanship coach, and now CEO 22 Jumps, in order to help prevent from his family and his own story, veteran suicides. Please welcome into the studio, Tristan Wimmer. What's going on, my friend?
Not a whole lot. Really appreciate you having me on the show. Yeah, like you said, Hoot went on the retreat this past Veterans Day weekend. Kind of, small world kind of thing. He looks very different from when I saw him last. Whenever that was, 18 years ago. But we actually found out a couple days into the retreat that he was one of my instructors at sniper school. That was pretty cool to find that out. But no, he was on the retreat. I think his company, Nomadic Research, sort of jumped on as a sponsor, and he wanted to come out, kind of check it out, but also kind of give it the sniff test. And his feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and he really wanted me to come on the show and speak with you, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, he said some stuff to me when he called me, and he said, this retreat really kind of opened his eyes to what's going on, and that, a lot more stuff needs to be done in this space and kind of the atmosphere that you're doing it in. And it all kind of ties back, as I said in the beginning, to your brother and to your family, that you've experienced this firsthand. Your family has experienced this firsthand. And we talk a lot about it on the show, but I think, a lot of people do talk about it, but then it kind of goes to the back of people's minds. Everyone thinks it's an important thing, but then you get a couple weeks down the road, a couple months down the road, and it just kind of goes to the wayside, and they don't think about it. But it's veteran suicide, and not only veteran suicide with you. I think that there's an interesting touch to your story and your family story, is that this is all related to TBIs that were suffered. And, I don't think a lot of research is being done in that space other than with you guys coming forward and kind of bringing these ideas. So let's talk a little bit about, first off, growing up, like how you got into this, because it's not only you, it's your brother. You both served in the Marines. You both were very serious about your jobs. There was a really competitive spirit. So let's talk about kind of that upbringing between you two, your family, and what got you going down this path.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And the story kind of begins like well before I was born. Military service, we joke in my family, say military service is the family business. We can track military service in the United States in our family, all the way back to the Civil War. We're on the wrong side of that one historically, but my family, they're all from like Western North Carolina, Western Virginia, traditionally. But great uncle died in Battle of the Bulge. He was a tank commander in France. It's actually who my dad is named after. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, he was an infantryman in Korea with 25th ID. He was a radio operator, and my dad started off in the Marine Corps, and he finished out his career in the Coast Guard, did 30 years in aviation. He was actually air crew chief on search and rescue helicopters for most of his career. So my mom was a loadmaster on a C-130, transitioned and kind of finished her career as a yeoman. And then, so I grew up in the military, grew up with stories of my grandfather. He didn't talk about it much, but there was enough sort of knowledge of sort of what he did over there that, kind of his family and friends would tell his stories for him a little bit. And so it was always something I knew was an option. I did give college a try right out of high school. I did about a year, realized it wasn't for me. And, there was like much bigger things in the world going on at the time that I wanted to be a part of. And so I joined the Marine Corps in very end of 2003. And then, I was in 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, was an infantryman, assaultman at 51, did a deployment, went to sniper school, did another deployment, and then ended up getting out after 4 years. My brother, after a year after I joined, we were always super competitive, but it was always like a positive thing, right? Like we kind of positively motivated, and we clashed. We were brothers, it happens, but it was always like a force for good. And he joined a year after me, almost to the day. And he wanted to go to 5th Marines, and I told him, hey, if you have the opportunity, go to recon. And so he listened to my advice, went to 1st Recon right out of SOI. And he was on his first deployment to Iraq in '06 and suffered a massive traumatic brain injury. The Marine Corps was pushing law rockets out to the ground units. They just needed a smaller diameter rocket for employment in some of these cities. The AT-4 was a great weapon system, but it almost packed a little too much punch in some of those confined spaces. Shooting them up on rooftops, you get backblast, reverb off the parapet or, off a wall or something. So they just wanted something that, would do the job, punch through a wall or, disable material without, necessarily like putting the lives of people who were actually employing the weapon system in harm's way. So it was a great weapon system. They didn't really do a great job of sort of integrating them. There wasn't like a plan, at least from my experience, there wasn't really a plan. In '05, we had a bunch just kind of show up one day, and they, there were some guys who were a little more knowledgeable. At the time, we were attached to some Force Recon guys, and there were some older Force Recon guys who were familiar with the weapon system and gave us a little prac app, and my brother had almost the same exact experience a year later. They were getting ready for a mission, got some law rockets, and they basically put someone in charge to run the range to learn how to use them. And the person in charge of the ordnance mixed in live rockets with dummy rockets, just a lack of familiarity between the two, I think. And then, it was, most ranges include some period of, instruction, right? School circle kind of, hey, this is the weapon system. This is how you charge it. This is how you fire it, right? And he was giving that period of instruction with what he thought was a dummy rocket. And my brother was standing in the backblast, and he essentially ate the entire cone of the backblast to the face. Burns, facial, a bone, fractures, secondary frag, blown out eardrums, the whole thing. So I actually blew his helmet and part of his body armor off his body. Rushed to Balad, rushed to Rammstein, very long recovery at Walter Reed and BAMC in San Antonio. And, it really, you could kind of detect right away that things were different. One of the first things that we keyed in on as his family is that he didn't want any of us to visit him when he was recovering, which we thought was really odd. But we respected his wishes, and we kind of let him recover the way that he wanted to recover. And so I actually didn't see him physically until about a year after his injury, and right away kind of could tell he was a little more hair triggered, a little more quick to get angry, a little more volatile, I guess. I kind of brushed it off at the time, thinking that, well, maybe that's just like, being what a recon Marine, ends up being, or whatever, right? Like I work with some recon Marines, and there's definitely a lot of guys with some volatility in the Marine Corps, especially at that time. I think the Marine Corps in general is kind of a beacon. It kind of attracts guys like that. So I didn't really think much of it. It kind of just blended in with the rest of the culture, right? I noticed a change just as his brother, but I didn't think much of it. And it really didn't start to manifest until he made the decision to get out. He went over to MARSOC for first MSOB, First Marine Special Operations Battalion, sort of the first generation of guys to stand up that unit. And he deployed again to Afghanistan, and made the decision to get out. And then it really was when he made it back home, and he wasn't in that environment where he can you can kind of explain away some of the behaviors, that it really became apparent that something had changed.
Well, I want to point out something. When you say that he had changed, that's why I bring up the youth, because you said it yourself that there was always kind of that camaraderie, that competition between you two. And the reason I want to talk about that early age, if we could go back to it for just a few minutes, is because I want you to show the difference. And when you and I talked on the phone and we talked about all of this going on, it was a different kind of competition between you two. It was a different kind of, oil and water between you two that continued to grow, and we'll of course get into it later on. But can we talk just about how you guys' relationship was in the beginning? Because what I would like to show throughout our whole conversation, because you and I have said how important it is you've got to see the differences. You've got to see how these things are affecting that person as a whole, because I think people see ones and twos of it, but they don't see the whole picture. So can we go back to that and just talk about how it used to be between you two?
Oh yeah, I mean, we did all the same sports together. It's kind of weird. I was his older brother. We were only separated by 18 months, but I always said that he was just like more kind of naturally gifted. I was always kind of the more book smart one, and he was always like the more athletic one, right? And so whenever sports we did together, he tended to be a little bit better than me, even though he was younger than me. But it always pushed me. That was always like, I'm gonna make sure I am just as good as he is, which just meant I had to work harder, right? And so having him in my life just forced me to work harder to kind of keep at his like kind of natural athletic level. We did soccer together. Played a lot of soccer together growing up. That was kind of the thing we did together for most of our childhood. Once we hit high school, we sort of deviated a little bit. He got into wrestling and kind of stuck with soccer, and then I kind of chose to go the football route. I just was always a little bit bigger than him, and but we stayed competitive, right? Like we even just like getting around the neighborhood, right? Like we had, it wasn't good enough to just have like a regular old bike, like we buy these like kind of 2 or 3 generations removed, like chromoly framed street bikes or racing bikes, and we would just like get from point A to point B as fast as we could, right? And then it was always, everything was a competition, but it was always like a really healthy thing. And I'm not saying that we didn't fight, we certainly did, but the fights were, hey, we're brothers, we have a disagreement, and we're gonna duke it out maybe, but there's always a stopping point, right? Like neither one of us ever really wanted to hurt each other. We just were, I feel like I kind of pushed him to improve in areas that he knew he was weaker in, and he certainly helped me kind of improve in areas that I was weaker in. And I kind of credit my brother for kind of inspiring me to go the scout sniper route. I mean, I joined the Marine Corps and went into the infantry. I very clearly remember the call, where he told me he was going to join, he wanted to join, and he said he wanted to go to 5th Marines. And I said, hey man, like I had been in the Marine Corps for a year at that point, and I said, hey, like if you have the opportunity, go to recon. And he took my advice, but like, I remember I can't remember if I was coming or going from a deployment. I can't remember that, but I remember after he graduated jump school, he came to Horno, which is where 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines is, where 1st Marine Regiment is. And I saw him standing at the edge of the parade deck, and he had his jump wings on, just kind of like a, hey, I got this kind of, I got one on you kind of thing. And I was like, oh, okay, well, what's my next step then? Like, okay, I'll go scout sniper, right? And then he went to MARSOC, right? And so we were always pushing each other in that way. And then when, after I was out and I had been going to school and he got out, it became very clear that sort of brother sheen to our, whatever disagreements was kind of gone for him. He became, not to mischaracterize him, I don't want to paint like a black-white picture. It wasn't like we didn't go out and laugh, and we got into climbing together, we got into skydiving together, base jumping together. So we were still like competitive and had that healthy competitiveness. But whenever things did get heated, there was no like reasoning with him. It became always went to violence, always. And he had studied jiu-jitsu before he actually moved back home. He went to Brazil and had studied jiu-jitsu for a year. So it was a problem. You got a guy who's aggressive and who's a trained fighter, and I'm going into that situation assuming that it's going to be a tap of the gloves, kind of an unspoken sort of agreement that we're not going to hurt each other, and to realize very quickly that he's not playing by the same rules. It became very pretty scary to be around him, actually.
Well, I want to ask you, Do you think that's all from the TBI, or do you think that that was kind of bred into him in the Marine Corps, that aggressiveness got more because you had seen him his whole life, you had competed with him his whole life. But even when you mentioned the story about him coming to the parade deck and standing there with his wings, it seems out of character from how you describe him as a kid. So do you think that that aggressiveness, that one-upsmanship really got bred out in the military?
No, no. I mean, I would say if there was character-wise, if there was like one thing that like kind of was like a very different between us, I'm not a very braggadocious type. My brother has always been a very braggadocious, or he was always a very braggadocious type.
Okay.
So the braggadocio didn't really like it wasn't something that like emerged in the Marine Corps. I think it supercharged it, and then so what I think it's kind of all of the above, right? I don't think there's any part of it that doesn't have a role to play. I think my brother, as I did, really learned what we were capable of in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps in a time of war does do that to you, right? Like you go through some of the best training in the world, and then you immediately get to apply those skills, and you kind of feel invincible, right? That's the reason why guys come back and they buy, Gixxer 1000s and they crash them on I-5 going 160 miles an hour, right? Like they just feel absolutely invincible. And so I think that like it supercharged his braggadociousness, but I think the backstop to it all, right? The ability to sort of like logic through being angry about something, or the ability to kind of talk yourself off a ledge, or like count back from 10, whatever version of that you do for yourself, right? Like the ability to sort of like be angry about something and sort of, kind of reason through it, that was sort of pulled, right? Like almost like the chalk blocks on that were pulled a little bit. And it just, like once he got going, there was like absolutely nothing stopping him from getting violent with anybody and everybody that he thought offended him, whether real or perceived.
Yeah, and the whole thing is, I want people to understand though, you weren't shy or not experienced in the world of violence too. If I remember correctly, your unit was part of Operation Steel Curtain, and that was a whole week of fighting cities, door to door, buildings. So I want to kind of talk about you and how you felt going into that, because your characters seem to be splitting in two different directions. You both are kind of the same growing up. As you go into the military, though, and you experience this world of violence and all of this, you kind of turn it back on itself. You decide to, just do your job. You're not really changing that much. So can we talk about you as a person going into that, seeing those first things of combat, kind of experiencing it for yourself, and how it kind of changed you a little bit? Because on the surface, it doesn't really seem like there was much change.
Well, I wouldn't say there's much change. I think I do a pretty good job, sometimes better than others. Like I don't know. So I mean, I had a pretty outstanding deployment, especially for an infantryman, or it being in an infantry unit. I got to do pretty much everything you can do in an infantry unit in my 4 years. I'm sure some people might take umbrage with that or whatever, but no, I mean, like, it definitely changes you. I certainly came back and I drank a lot more. That was one thing that I left, the kind of bad habit that I left. And, my, if I had to like kind of cherry pick a couple of things, I definitely, drinking is just part of the culture. So like whenever I got stressed or whatever, like drinking was an easy thing to go to, but I've always been pretty jovial. And I think that like my thing, and there's a lot of guys like in my situation or sort of have my experience trajectory that use humor as like you apply humor to everything. And Kieran did that too. But I think where I would run into something that I couldn't like joke my way out of, or I ran into something that, I felt like somebody was like, being purposely like a dick to me or something, right? Like, intentionally trying to make my life a little bit worse, right? I have the ability to like de-escalate and sort of sidestep it, right? And I realize that like, I don't know if there's the right way to approach it, but I kind of always know that like, it's whatever you're dealing with in the moment, like it's gonna pass, and like and as long as you don't overreact to it, like it's gonna be okay. And I think that if I had to make a comparison to my brother didn't have that. he was very much like, I feel aggrieved and I'm going to make this right now.
Did
So
that come out with your parents or any other family members, or was it mostly just you?
no, I mean, I would say that in terms of like who we modeled ourselves after, like I definitely modeled myself after my dad. My dad comes from a family of men of very few words, and it wasn't like my dad didn't talk. My dad, he was always a de-escalator. He just like sort of like drama, like I'm not a part of it, right? I'm gonna leave.
Well, I mean, even more, did your brother act aggressively towards them?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, my bro. I mean, I don't know. My mom would probably not be happy that I'm saying this, but there was, or my dad too, actually. But there was a point where my brother got physical with my dad, and my dad was like, "I'm done with him," like, and essentially didn't kind of severed the relationship there for a while. And we're as a family unit, we weren't great at like talking to one another, right? So like, I mean, like. Deployment tempo was high. Training, whenever I wasn't deployed, I was training to deploy. I was either coming or going, right? And so, like, I kind of used the Marine Corps as a little bit of an escape. To be perfectly honest, kind of escape my home life. I would say that justice was pretty heavy-handed growing up in my family. Not the most like nurturing of people. Would protect you like a bear protects his cubs. Or protects her cubs, but like. And I'm not gonna like point out who or what. I don't know if they're gonna listen to this or not, but yeah. So it wasn't like the most nurturing of upbringings. I love them dearly, and they're my parents, and I will forever love them. But I definitely I escaped. Like, and I mean, I've talked to both of them about this, so that they wouldn't be surprised to hear this. But I definitely used the Marine Corps as an escape from just sort of like everything. And I think my brother saw me do that, and he was like, "That's a really good idea." I'm like, "I'm going to do that too." Once he was old enough to do it. And so, but yeah, I think I really put a lot of I put a lot of sort of what ultimately happened to my brother, kind of at the feet of his TBI, because yes, the braggadociousness was always there. It was supercharged by the Marine Corps, supercharged by feeling like an absolute invincible superhuman. But you sort of like you build this like sort of like critical mass of ego, and then you leave that environment, and it doesn't really fit in the rest of the world. And so I think my brother felt a lot of frustration because of that, and just like chose to deal with it in a very destructive way. Not only to him, but to everybody who cared about him. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did, but it's interesting to me that you say that that it was heavy-handedness. You lead to certain things when you talk about it, but the way you picked to get away from it was the most violent way you could, was to go into the Marine Corps and go to war. I mean, we're talking 2003, 2004, and then you get right into the thick of it. So it seems strange to me that you're looking for a way away from that, but you go into that same world, not only a world of violence and heavy-handedness with the Marine Corps, but you go into that military lifestyle that was a part of your entire family. So I'm just trying to figure out what made it seem like it was such a great way to get away when it's pretty much just an extension of what you were already doing.
I think it was that year in college, honestly. Like if I had to really like, because like I always knew that military, because my thinking was if I was going to do it, I was going to do it, right? And I when I was 18, 19, that's how I thought about it. Now that I'm a little bit older, I look back and I kind of wish I had been a rescue swimmer. Or something like that. Because I grew up around rescue swimmers, right? So, that have a pretty awesome lifestyle. But no, I think I made a concerted effort. I was good enough in high school to get a scholarship to go to a state school. And it just felt pretty uninspiring. I lived in a frat house, and I wasn't really taking my school seriously because it wasn't that challenging. And I did that for about a year, and I was just like, I watched the invasion of Iraq on TV, and I was like, dude, what am I doing here? I mean, frat parties are fun, but I'm not really like none of this is inspiring. And so I just kind of, all of a sudden, like from one day to the next, I walked from the recruiter's office and I said, hey, like, I want to join the Marine Corps. And they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be infantry. And they looked at my ASVAB and they were like, you can choose anything you want. And I said, I want to be in infantry. And he's like, okay. He's like, when do you want to leave? And I was like, as soon as possible. So I think I signed up in December, and I was in boot camp that same month. So I mean, it was less than 30 days from like signing the papers to doing it, to going. So, I didn't really like bounce it off my parents at all. I think I told my dad, and my dad told me, as long as you have thought through what you're doing. I was like, yeah. I actually told him not to tell mom, because I knew she tried to talk me out of it, which she did. She actually misunderstood me when I said I was like, oh, I'm joining the Marine Corps, and my mom said, oh, well, don't say that. You're just bored in college, it'll get better. And I was
Don't
like, no,
say that.
You don't understand, Mom. I already joined the Marine Corps. She was pretty upset with me. But no, I mean,
But it doesn't sound like they're, even when she wasn't happy with you, it doesn't sound like they were super supportive of the move either, which is also kind of weird when the whole family has a military background too.
No, I mean, well, I think, I don't know. It is an interesting observation. I don't think I've ever really thought of it, to be perfectly frank. I know my dad was, he was proud, but I think he was very, he knew what was going on in the world, and so he knew that there was a pretty good chance that I was going to see some of it. And my mom, I think my mom just always thought that I was like better than it, to a certain degree, that I was going to be the one that sort of reached escape velocity of like enlisting in the military, right? And so I think there was obviously like the immediate concern of like getting hurt or getting killed, but I think my mom was excited for me to sort of break the trend. And then when I didn't, I think they both knew sort of like what was some of the things that were in store for me. I think they had their own sort of reactions to that. But no, supportive, I would not say that was. I'd say my dad was proud. My mom is proud now. My mom has never not been proud, but I think I think the overriding like emotional response my mom had was disappointment.
So do you think you were altruistic when you went in? Like you were, because that's what it sounds like. You're like, frat party's fun, but I'm not doing anything with my life. So it almost seems like you're trying to do something bigger than yourself. You think that was the reason that you did it?
I mean, so my biological grandfather, he fought in Korea, but my and this is like family history stuff, but he came back and he had a lot of struggles, so much so that my like grandmother, my biological paternal grandmother, actually like fled him and like moved away. When that was like a huge like family history thing. The siblings were split in terms of like feelings about it. I think the older siblings were pretty butthurt about that right up to the end of her life. And she married somebody who he was in the Air Force, but he was in the Air Force in the early 60s. And he was actually one of the very first, he left the Air Force and he ended up being one of the very first classes of Peace Corps cohorts.
Wow, that's quite a switch.
Yeah, so this is like all before he met my grandmother, and so he spent 4 or 5 years in the Peace Corps, like building water systems, and because he was a water purification specialist in the Air Force, and so he got out and he studied engineering, and then actually went to South America. He spent most of his time in Bolivia, digging irrigation ditches and like digging wells for these people, so he put his money where his mouth is, and he's probably the most like altruistic person I've ever met. And he did that, and then he went to the Red Cross, and it was actually part of the Vietnamese refugee he actually ran the Vietnamese refugee program in South Vietnam, like getting displaced people from the Vietnam War. He would place people with families in the United States, and he actually ran one of the orphanages from Vietnamese children whose parents were killed. And that's actually where him and my grandmother met. She was working for the Red Cross, but I think she did more like admin stuff, and she went on some sort of mission to Vietnam to support one of the executives for the Red Cross, and that's how he was there sort of representing this like orphanage and this refugee program, and that's where they met. And they sort of left the Red Cross and were always helping out. It was, religious based. They were both like devout Lutherans. And so like they continued to do, mission work overseas. I don't know if they call it mission work, but, it's essentially mission work overseas, for many years. And so those were the grandparents that I spent the most time with growing up. So it was always this like weird sort of juxtaposition where like, yes, we have this like really sort of like storied, family military history of like, leading cavalry charges and like, in the Civil War, I think my, I don't know how many like greats that is, but one of the famous like family lore stories is that he led one of the big cavalry charges at like the Second Battle of Bull Run. And was killed. And, so my grandfather and his brother, being killed in World War II, and my dad being named after him. And so there's rich military sort of battle fighting story in my family. And then, but the grandparents that actually spent the most time with growing up, they were just like the nicest, most altruistic people like I've ever met. And so like I kind of carried both of those things with me all the time, like wanting to experience some of that myself, like the stories of like the my grandfather and my and beyond, sort of his lineage kind of going back, but also like very much wanting to like be an altruistic person. And I mean like, and that started even before the nonprofit. I mean, I got out of the Marine Corps and I actually got into volunteer search and rescue in Arizona while I was in college. So on the weekends I do call outs to do like distressed hiker or like stuck climber or sort of rescues out in Arizona. So yeah.
Well, you were at Arizona, right?
Yeah.
So you got all that right there. You got the Coronado Mountains. You got a lot of desert out there because I was stationed out there. So
yeah,
there's a lot of distressed hikers. There's also a lot of people that are moving across lands that they need to call in to be rescued out of there and meet with our border protection officers.
Yeah. I mean, I would say probably 60-70% of the calls was always, lost hiker, somebody is up and decided with no experience or preparedness, like to go on a hike in the desert with no water or something like that. I would say that's probably like, and unfortunately a lot of those calls end up being like body recovery calls, but there were some pretty cool ones too. Some high angle stuff, kind of working. We actually like partnered, and it's a little more organized now. It used to be called, I think it's still called Camera, Central Arizona Mountain Rescue, but now it's like a part of Maricopa County Sheriff's. But we used to, on some of the more technical rescues, we used to actually call in support from the PJs out of Tucson to come help. So it was always pretty cool. And that's, that was probably my favorite job I've ever had, and I got paid $0 for it. So if that's altruistic, that's what.
I mean, I still think that it kind of is altruistic when you're trying to do something above yourself. Do you feel that because you stayed for 4 years, but do you feel like that you saw everything that you wanted to see in that 4 years? Because like I said, I mean, it's door-to-door fighting when you're doing Steel Curtain. Do you feel like you saw everything that you wanted to see, or maybe even more than you wanted to see?
Well, like I said, I'm not one to like thump my own chest. It was a very concentrated level of violence in a short amount of time, and I don't think it affected me all. To say it didn't affect me at all would be crazy. But there are those people out there who just are seemingly unaffected by it. It definitely like changes your worldview and sort of changes. I think for me, it's sort of put a dent in my feelings about humanity a little bit, right? Because that particular operation in particular, right? You had you had these tribes out there who were supportive of the United States sort of bringing order, and there was a lot of funding for like the Iraqi border patrol out there, a lot of equipment. There's a lot of training of the Iraqi army out there, and essentially the operations in like Fallujah, Ramadi, Habaniya, Haklaniya, they had pushed a lot of the hardened fighters closer and closer to the Syrian border, and so you had these fighters that got their asses kicked in these other cities showing up to Ubaidi and Al-Qaim and just spreading chaos, right? And so essentially that operation, some of the origins of that operation were like the locals asking for help with these fighters who had essentially like pushed these people out of their homes and were killing leaders of tribes, killing some of the new border patrol units. And so, I don't know. There wasn't like the heaviness of like doing the thing, because it was like, I think there's a lot of like, hey, we're absolutely here for the right reasons, and we're definitely like, doing it for the right reasons. So I don't carry it with me. There's no like heaviness that I necessarily carry with me about it. But I wanted to do, I'd kind of gone in the Marine Corps, to do the whole thing. I wanted to do like 20 years plus, because my dad, my dad did 30 years in the military. My mom did 23. So doing it for a career was absolutely an option. They had just stood up MARSOC, and I had a lot of we had supported Force Recon, for a chunk of that deployment, and so I kind of had met a lot of the right people to sort of like be on that path. But it was really, I think, what changed my mind on the Marine Corps was not really anything that I did or saw or experienced or violence that I distributed, but it was how my brother got hurt, and it was the fact that it got swept under the rug. Nobody got in trouble for what happened to my brother. And it was really when that kind of came into focus that, like, essentially the Marine Corps was going to just sweep it under the rug and that nobody was going to be held accountable for it. Really changed my attitude quite a bit. I, perhaps a little too knee jerk, perhaps, a little too emotionally driven, but, I kind of felt like, I don't want to say that expendable is not the right word, but it kind of feels like the right word,
Well, but the thing there is, he didn't carry that forward. You did.
Yeah, no, I did.
You're the one that had the knee jerk and the problem with it. He didn't. So I'm just kind of trying to understand that when you see that, once again, are we going back to that thing where you're looking at things through different lenses than your brother or different lenses than your family? Because that's what it always seems to kind of point to me during your story, is that you're looking at things completely different than everyone around you.
I wouldn't say everyone around me. I would say, I've never thought about it that way. I wouldn't say everybody around me. I would say that I took on a lot more responsibility because I carried a lot of guilt after my brother got hurt, that he had followed me into the Marine Corps in the first place, that I had convinced him to go to recon instead of going to the infantry. And then it's sort of like a series of decisions that I made sort of, when he got out and it became really like kind of dangerous to be around him. I mean, I carried a lot of guilt about that. And I think it's just I don't think that I think differently than anybody else in my family. I just think, I don't know. Well, a way that like somebody has described, both my brother and I, we have like a very kind of sort of like deep sense of like right and wrong, like righteousness, and not like righteousness in like a I don't know how to not like a self-righteousness, like, but like a, hey, that's fucking wrong. And like I'm either gonna do something about it. If I can't do anything about it, then I'm not gonna be a part of it. And I think that's where I landed, in that once I realized that like it was essentially getting swept under the rug and that nobody was going to be held accountable for my brother's injury, it was just like, I can't do anything about it. Right. I can't, there's nobody I can scream at that is going to make this better. So I'm just not going to be a part of it anymore. And I, got out of the Marine Corps, grew my hair out long, started to climb, or neon tank tops, traveled all over the place. And I put a lot of effort into distancing myself, like identity wise, from the Marine Corps as a result of that.
And that's what I was going to ask you next. Was, you said you felt a lot of guilt for what happened to him, telling him to go in that direction to recon. So do you think leaving, growing out your hair, distancing yourself, do you think that subconsciously or consciously, or however you want to look at it, took some of that guilt away?
No, I think it was my best solution from, like going into the Marine Corps is like running away from a less than ideal family situation. And I think going out and, studying economics and learning how to climb and growing my hair out, that was like me running from that situation.
Okay. So how do you look at that then? Because that's a whole new spin on your story to me, is that you say, and the reason it's a whole new spin is because I don't look at you as running from anything at any time in the story. So it's crazy that you put it that way.
Well, I guess running away wouldn't be like the best way to describe it. It's just like distancing myself from it, right? Because it's just like so emotionally charged, right? Like just my standalone experience in the Marine Corps. Even if you took my brother out of the equation, it was just like hey, you kind of look around and you're like, okay, these guys are in the positions that I want to be in, when I get to their age, right? like, are they enjoying their lives? Are they having fun doing what they're doing? And I got some advice sort of across the board, kind of like when MARSOC got stood up, and I was like, hey, like, is this something I should be pursuing? And at the time, I mean, I think historically, I think people look back and they realize that, kind of the formation of MARSOC was initially kind of a little bit of a mess, rightfully so. They're essentially standing up a special operations unit, with a bunch of Marines. It's like inevitably going to be some rough edges. And at the time, I just wasn't something that I really wanted to be a part of anymore. And so I was like, I did it. I didn't do everything. Did I do everything I possibly could have in the Marine Corps? No, but did I think it was like worth the squeeze? Because I actually remember calling a buddy of mine. He was actually in Afghanistan at the time, and because I was talking to the career retention officer, and he's like, and this is back when they were handing out like $100,000, tax-free reenlistment bonuses, and I was an E5 Scott sniper with combat deployments under my belt, and so they were just like, hey, like, we'll give you $100,000 tax-free.
But let's also point out something too, because I want people to understand why it's so strange that you walked away. You'd also been meritoriously promoted twice ahead of schedule. You were in E5 in under 4 years. You had combat experience. You had been to sniper school. You were an honor graduate in pre-sniper school. Like, it wasn't your run-of-the-mill Marine that just goes, you know what, I did my 4 years. It's time for me to step away. You were decorated. You were a combat veteran. And you had all these things going for you. So to step away seems like a very strange decision.
No, I guess it would. It was. I felt very, very strongly about my brother's injury. Very, very strongly.
So did you talk to him about that? Did you ever say, like, I feel guilt about this or anything, or was there never that ability or that chance to do something like that?
I never expressed my like feelings of guilt about it. Because he didn't want us to kind of be involved in his recovery, which was like a weird thing, right? And so I was kind of like at arm's distance trying to pull information out of him. I mean, when he was in BAMC in San Antonio, he actually ended up getting married. I think it was more of a contract marriage than anything. But like, I didn't find out about that until after he was divorced, And then my mom brought it up around the table one day.
How did he meet and marry someone while he's in recovery in BAMC?
I don't know, but like, I was just like dumbfounded, right? Like, and that's how much of a distance he put between us, and it was just like a very weird thing to navigate. And so, you're right. I never really talked to him about how I felt about it, because I kind of thought that he really didn't want to talk about it, and he never talked about it, like, ever. And I even like way after that fact, like when he was like really spiraling, I was like, essentially like, hey man, like, I think you got some stuff you need to like figure out, and he just like was unwilling to talk about it. But you're right. Like, it is a weird. My future in the Marine Corps was pretty bright. I felt very, very, and I think there was a lot of like strong feelings about how my brother's injury was handled from like an administrative standpoint. I mean, but like, I talked to a buddy of mine that I went to sniper school with. He was currently in Afghanistan, and they were going to send me to his unit, to get my reenlistment bonus tax free. And I asked him straight up. I was like, "Hey, like, what are your thoughts? Like, should I do this? If I do this, what are your thoughts on this?" And he's like, "Man, like, most of the casualties we're taking is like toe poppers. Guys are, we have like the casualty rate is really high, and they're definitely like hooking and jabbing for sure. But like, he's like, you're more likely to step on a mine out here than anything else." Like the days of like, fighting the big firefights in Iraq are over. It's a totally different environment out here.
So did you think if you got hurt that the military would just leave you?
No, I mean, I kind of did the math. I was like, another 4 years for $100,000 split 4 ways is $25,000 a year. Like, is me losing a leg worth $25,000 a year?
But that goes to the question. Did you think that they were, it's after your brother's injury that you put that into the factor?
Yeah.
Is that, well, would that money be worth losing a leg? Because you've just said over and over again how mad you were that they didn't take care of him. They didn't do it properly. They just kind of swept it under the rug. I have to have this feeling that you thought, well, fuck, we're all numbers. And if something happens to me, that $100,000 is going to go quickly. And then there's not going to be any more after that.
Well, and I actually haven't thought about this in a long time, but I also thought about like, if I got hurt, what would that do to my mom? And I have a younger brother. Like I have a brother who's 10 years younger than me, 11 years younger than me. I mean, and he was post-deployment leave. Both my brother and I, we would bring our, because, Pendleton's not that far away from Phoenix. We'd bring our buddies to get them out of base. And, we'd have a fire in the backyard and just like tell stories, right? And my brother was, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, just like, holy shit. And, it was, I think I thought about my youngest brother, and I thought about my mom, and like sort of in that like decision. I was like, okay, my brother's already been hurt, because at the time I kind of felt like they were sweeping it under the rug, but I wasn't like 100% sure at that time. It really wasn't until like the very end of my first enlistment that I realized it was actually being swept under the rug about a year after it happened. And, that was all this information was coming in, and I was kind of making all these phone calls to my buddy who was already in, Helmand at the time. And so like I was just, and sort of like the thing that kind of pushed me over the edge of not re-enlisting was, okay, my brother's already been fucked up. Like if I go and I also get fucked up, like it's not worth that $100,000, and it's not worth like putting my brother and my mom through that. So that was essentially my like decision making metrics for getting out.
Can we talk a little bit about the sweeping it under the rug? Because I want to kind of get your idea of, your thoughts on how they swept it under the rug, how they didn't take care of the situation. Because, there's thousands of those stories out there about the military, about people getting hurt and not getting the proper treatment, or having post-traumatic stress, all that kind of stuff, and not getting the right treatment. So can we kind of walk through how you thought that they were sweeping it under the rug and how they were kind of handling the entire affair?
No, I mean it's pretty cut. I mean the guy who was giving the period of instruction and thought he had a dummy rocket. I don't really put it on him. He actually had reached out to me after my brother committed suicide and apologized and I my brother never blamed him. I think everybody, and I talked to some other guys in his unit, and nobody ever really blamed him because he was basically told to give his period of instruction and given what he thought was a dummy rocket. The person I really put it on is the person who's in charge of the ordnance and essentially the commander, right? Those two. And, I learned that the person who was in charge of the ordnance mixed in live rockets with dummy rockets, and that he did not check that the rocket he was giving the instructor was indeed a dummy rocket. And I think the instructor he was familiar with the law rockets, but he had never actually fired a law rocket. I think that was the story. But he was like the most, they basically chose him to like give the period of instruction. And so there was like this cascade of like poor decision making, which kind of came down to, that senior Marine who was in charge of the ordnance and the platoon commander who was kind of overseeing the whole thing. Platoon commanders are still in, or at least he was a couple of years ago. No sort of administrative, nothing. I actually put in a FOIA request to actually find the records of the incident. There is not a record in 1st Marine Division or 1st Recon at all about this incident. They didn't even like file it under like an incident report or an after action report. Like, it wasn't like they actively like covered it up. They just didn't report it. And therefore, like, because they didn't report it, there was nothing to like hold the people accountable who ultimately put my brother in that situation. And I know that the commander of that platoon stayed in the Marine Corps. I don't know if he's retired yet, but I know he was still in the Marine Corps as of a couple of years ago. And the guy who was ultimately in charge of the ordnance, his punishment was that he was not invited to go to MARSOC. That was his punishment. And he ended up retiring and, so I thought that was pretty shitty. Obviously, some of that stuff sort of unfolded after I had made the decision to get out. But I did ask my brother point blank in my sort of decision, when I was making my decision to stay in or get out, I was like, hey, is anybody going to be held accountable for this? And he told me no. And I think that fucked with my brother, too. I don't think he admitted it at first, but when he would drink heavily, he would bring it up. That's why I think it did bother him. And that's my little brother, man. That's like, I think that, so when I say it was swept under the rug, I don't mean like they didn't take care of him. They obviously got him the medical support he needed. They got him the places he needed to recover, but like, nobody was held accountable for it. And that, I think that's where that strong sense of right and wrong comes in. It's like, hey, like you did my brother wrong, and you're making it so that, nobody is going to be held accountable for it. And that's what really bothered me.
Okay. Perfect world. What happens?
Perfect world, they would at least get some sort of administrative, you know.
No, I'm asking you, perfect world, what would make you feel better about the situation?
Oh, I mean, I've moved past it. I mean, like, I do. I mean, do I wish it would have happened differently? Like, sure, like, absolutely. Have I put enough time and enough like effort and energy into like thinking of it from the Marine Corps perspective, like thinking of it from like a combat readiness perspective, like would it have done, you know, I mean, like, what would have happened to that unit that, was, I mean, it's a first recon platoon in '06 in Al Anbar. I mean, those guys are in high demand. They have a dangerous job and they need strong leadership. Like, does one mistake merit like pulling those guys off the line and giving them a command structure that they're not familiar with? Like, no, you know. But it took me a long time to sort of like reason through that. Um, you know, a phone call would have been nice. you know, I know they know about it. I know the platoon commander ended up calling my mom after the fact. Didn't feel the need to call me. Um, and in terms of the senior Marine who was actually in charge of the ordnance, I mean, nothing. So, I mean, just acknowledgement. I think, I understand why the Marine Corps would have wanted to not make a bigger administrative deal of that than they did. It's not beyond me, like operational readiness, I get it, mission first. But to have absolutely nothing and to not feel like I'm, owed a phone call or that, nobody's owed an explanation or that there's no sense of like, writing around. Although I will say that I actually learned a piece of information last year that really gave me, it really kind of made me turn a corner on this, how I feel about this. I was actually at one of our fundraising events for the nonprofit in Idaho, and I ran into a Marine he was a I think he retired as an officer, but he was enlisted. And we and I were just kind of chatting, and he was asking me about 22 jumps and asking me about like why I started it. And I told him about my brother, and he's like, oh, how did your brother get hurt? And I was just describing the incident, and he said, that's your brother? And I said, yeah. And he said, I know all about that incident. It's like a part of like rocket ranges now. Like it's like a cautionary tale they tell officers, when they're training them to like run rocket ranges now. He said, it's taught at the command level now as like a cautionary tale, and that made me feel pretty good that they're at least integrating it into like lessons learned at the very least. And after my brother killed himself, General Lefebvre, who was, I believe I don't know what position he held at the time, but I know at one point he was either first or second IMSOB. He might have been overall IMSOB commander when he actually reached out, and he apologized. He apologized for my brother's. He didn't like outright apologize, but he kind of acknowledged that the incident was a part of sort of my brother's deterioration. Not an outright like, and he had nothing to do with it. I just want to make that very clear. He had nothing to do with it. I think he just felt compelled to reach out and sort of acknowledge it. So all that stuff combined and sort of the work that I've put into kind of getting past it, like I don't need a pound of flesh anymore. I just wish it was handled differently, and in those months after the fact, because my brother's injury happened at the very beginning of that deployment. So at the very least, like kind of do the deployment and then mete out some sort of administrative action after the fact. I don't know. If you're asking me an ideal world, what would I want? I think that
Well,
would have been nice.
I guess I'm asking because I'm wondering what level it's going to be until you're, of course, not happy with the situation, but where you feel like, because you talk about that sense of right and wrong and justice and injustice, where you would feel, okay, justice was served. This happened. It was an accident. All of these, the perfect storm came together. But where do you feel better walking away from it?
Well, I think that's what 22 Jumps is all about, right? I think it's an acknowledgement that mistakes happen and that, it's, um, yeah, it's an acknowledgement that mistakes happen and that, we're trying to provide an outlet for people who carry heaviness through their careers, right? Whether that be military, law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, nurses, in any type of occupation that, there's like sort of occupational hazard and sort of a long tail effect of like, a trauma associated with it, like giving them an outlet through adventure sports, because that's something that I found immediately after the Marine Corps, and that's something my brother also found through parachute sports, and and we experienced together sort of after we left the Marine Corps. I don't really need anything, I just wish it was handled differently, but like I'm not looking for a pound of flesh. I'm not looking for anybody to swing for it. I think it was a realization for me that somebody's mistake could, like, in a training environment, could like lead to my brother's like kind of like slow motion deterioration of his quality of life until he's making the ultimate decision, and there's not even a record of it. I think there's somewhere in between not having a record of it at all and absolutely nobody getting in trouble, and like having something that is a corrective force to make sure it doesn't happen again. And like I said, just recently, I just learned that it is taught as a cautionary tale, at the command level. So, but yeah, I don't know, to answer your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the deterioration, though. I want to talk about, because I think we can kind of roll into the story while he's at BAMC. He's doing erratic things like getting married, not telling anyone about it. Let's talk about the decline and whether it was slow, whether it was fast, and, what's kind of being done to stop this boulder from rolling down the hill. This episode brought to you by Max Belts. Guys, are you looking for a perfect accessory to wear every single day for every single scenario? Well, you've come to the right place. We all know that nothing stands up to wear and tear like a good leather belt. If you're looking for the toughest leather belt on earth, then you've come to the right place. Max Belts. They're handcrafted in the USA by veterans who are serious about their craft. And if you're looking for a belt that's tough enough for your active lifestyle and help support those who've given so much to our country, look no further than Max Belts. It's the toughest belt on the planet. It's a perfect solution for casual or dress wear and ideal for utility and firearm carry. It's the highest caliber of American craftsmanship, and it also positively impacts our military charity partners. Once again, Max Belts, you can't go wrong with them. I wear them every day. They're the toughest belt on earth. And you can find all of this and so much more at maxbelts.com.
Well, I told him to stay in. When he told me he was getting out of the Marine Corps, I said, hey, man, I think it's... Because like I said, I was already kind of detecting things. And I told him that, hey, maybe the Marine Corps is a good place for you to stay. And he was pretty determined to get out. And so, my decision, because like I said, I found climbing as soon as I got out of the Marine Corps. I was doing climbing, going to school, and doing like volunteer search and rescue. My brother was the one that actually got into recreational skydiving first. So I actually followed him into skydiving. There's that like competitive, ness a little bit, but also it was just like a way to kind of build memories with him after the Marine Corps. And then, followed him into base jumping and so, I kind of wanted to connect with him via adventure sports, kind of continue to skill build, continue to have like really powerful experiences, continue to like, build memories together. And it was that for the most part. But it was really like after the events were over and like there was an opportunity to drink that like the perceptible differences in how we were handling our post-Marine Corps life were really, really started to surface. And I tried to be there for him as much as I could. He put me in the hospital a couple times. So, after a couple of years of that, I really had to like pull away from him physically. And, I made the decision to, do security contracting overseas, really... kind of two reasons. I wanted to, I had a friend who was into real estate investing in Phoenix, and so I wanted to build some capital to start doing that, but also just kind of put some time and distance between him and me, thinking that, I was maybe part of the problem, I was maybe a catalyst for his behavior. And therefore, like if I wasn't around, then he can have a couple years on his own to sort of figure things out, and then we can kind of patch things up on the back end. And that didn't happen. He ended up taking his own life after, I was in Afghanistan for 4 years, and I got the call from my mom that he had committed suicide. So that plan didn't work.
Can I go back to something real quick?
Sure.
When he said he was going to get out and you told him don't get out, I've got to understand your logic behind this of telling him not to get out. You had already gotten out. You guys had a pattern of kind of following each other in everything you did. You even did it when you got into the adventure sports together afterwards. Did you think that he wouldn't be able to handle the outside, or what was the logic behind keeping him in? Because like we've talked about this whole time, you were angry about how that was handled, and that led you ultimately to getting out. But when he's going to get out, you tell him to stay in.
I think I had made mention of it in the beginning. I think my brother's sort of behavior and sort of impulsiveness and aggression, I think it blends. You can blend in and you can normalize it when you're in the Marine Corps. And my concern was that if he had gotten out, that it would really be a destructive force for him. And I was, unfortunately, I was right.
So as you guys are doing this and you decide to contract, which is another interesting decision that I think that you got out of the Marine Corps, but then went back into contracting ultimately to make the money that we talked about wasn't worth it if you got hurt over in the Middle East.
It doesn't make a ton of sense. I know.
So I'm just, and that's the whole thing. And that's what I love about your story is, it's at this one point in your life where you're like, well, hitting a toe popper is not worth this money, but being a contractor so that I can do this, the money's worth it. I'm just trying to understand how you're thinking through this, because it's fascinating to me how you think about it.
No, the contracting thing was purely a transactional thing. I didn't have any. There was no, because going in the Marine Corps is like steeped in history and a lot of tradition and a lot of like patriotism, and not that being a contractor isn't patriotic. It serves a purpose, and we certainly did a lot of good work over there. It was a purely like, this is how much I'm getting paid. This is how long I have to work in order to acquire a couple of pieces of income producing property in Phoenix. It was purely like it was a more calculated, like financial decision than it was a patriotic decision. And I mean, to be totally frank, I finished my undergrad. I studied economics and international relations. I studied Arabic, and I had kind of molded my studies to go and work for a 3-letter agency, and I had some friends that were in contracting, and they said, hey, like it's the same, if you contract, you get the same background check, same background qualifications, but you can work yourself into the back door, when you go like like a full agency guy. So that was my sort of professional goal. And I was sort of putting that plan into place. And then, I started doing the real estate investing when I was contracting, and I realized that it's a much more lucrative thing to do, real estate investing. And ultimately, I was working towards a plan of not having to work anymore, as opposed to, working for the government. My ambition sort of changed while I was doing it. Just fortuitous timing, being able to put your money in investments and see those investments sort of bear fruit in a very short amount of time. It became pretty intoxicating. And so, yeah, and it was originally a 2-year plan. I ended up staying for 4 years. And then, I left the day I got the call from my mom that my brother had killed himself.
You regret that decision?
No, I don't. I don't regret the decision. I think it's one of those things. And, I think those who contract know exactly who I'm talking about. And I was becoming that. There's always you'll always just, because the money is just good enough to keep you there. And like I said, I graduated undergrad, and it was the best paying opportunity I had after undergrad was contracting, by a long shot.
Doesn't that seem crazy to you?
No, yeah, it's
that's insane to me.
By a long shot. I think, I can't remember now, but I think my next best offer outside of contracting was, make in the 60s, low 70s, pay wise. And I was making over double that a year. My first year. By my fourth year, I think I was making like just over $250,000 a year. Um, so I mean that was from a financial perspective, it was a no brainer. Um, and
Now, are you single this whole time? Are you married, or are you while you're doing this contracting?
I met my now wife in between my initial vetting course and my sniper course. So, and we stayed in touch for the first, like, I don't know, 6 months, kind of loosely, and then I made the effort to visit her. I met her in North Carolina. I was actually visiting my grandparents in North Carolina, and she was there. She lived in Pittsburgh. I lived in Phoenix. No, no, no ambitions of it like being like an actual long term thing. And we stayed in touch, and we made travel plans together, and we became like a couple probably halfway through my first year contracting, and we stayed a couple long distance couple all through it, and now we're married.
Because that's when you're single, that's a lot of money to be making. But having a relationship, having a wife or a spouse or someone significant changes things drastically over there, because now you're not only concerned about yourself, you're concerned about, once again, like you said, about hurting your mom if you got hurt, or your little brother seeing that. Did you have those feelings kind of pop up again having a relationship?
I think once it became more serious, I started to have those kinds of thoughts, but I was pretty laser focused on my goal of like making enough passive income that I wouldn't have to work anymore if I didn't want to work. And she was on board with that plan. Now, like I said, I originally pitched to her as a 2-year plan. It ended up being a 4-year plan. And she, to her credit, she's an absolute stalwart. Was then, is now. She's like my superhero. She stuck with me, and really rode the Bronco. When my brother died, I was a mess after that happened, and she stayed with me through all that. And she's my superhero. She's awesome. But no, I mean, like, I think one of the most attractive things about my wife is that she was independent. When I met her, she didn't need anything. I bought nice things for her, and we went on trips and stuff, but like, she didn't need me. She had a professional career. She was an editor at a newspaper, a major newspaper here in Pittsburgh, and she didn't we didn't need each other. We wanted to be with each other, and I think that's what made it work.
So, as you come back, I know you came back the day that you got the call about your brother. But while you're over there, are you hearing things that's going back here? Because I kind of want to get back into the kind of the degradation of his situation. Are you hearing anything over there? Are you talking to him? Are you talking to your parents? Or is this completely blindsiding you?
No, it's not blindsiding me. It was kind of a package deal. I went on contract, and the last time I actually saw him was like a week before I was going to my vetting course. And I told him, I said, hey, I think we need to take a little break. I'm gonna take this job overseas. I don't know how long I'm gonna be gone for, but it's gonna be at least for 2 years. Let's just reconnect on the back end of this. And so we did not communicate a ton. I was still getting sort of updates from my folks whenever something came up that was noteworthy. But no, I mean, I heard about, my brother rolled a truck on the freeway and fled the scene. My brother was getting in fights and getting arrested, and it was an enormous emotional drain on my mom and my little brother. And my dad was living in Tennessee. My mom and my little brother was in Phoenix, and so a lot of his volatility would find its way to my mom's house. And I had friends. A mutual friend of ours sort of run into him in town, and like kind of like, hey, is your brother okay? Like, he seems a little unhinged, and so no, I was getting lots of reports back that my brother wasn't doing well, but on face value, it was such a weird thing, like he finished his undergrad degree, he was like traveling the world base jumping. He did get his VGLI payout, so he got his $100,000 tax free from the VA from his injury. He was in a master's program when he ended up taking his own life. So on face value, it still seemed like he was setting things up and knocking them down, right? Like, it just, he was kind of hitting all the marks sort of on his trajectory through life. And so, like, I kind of chalked it up to, as I did in the past, I was just like, okay, that's just, he's just like a super animated, super emotional, like volatile guy, but he's still managing his like life well enough to kind of get through all these goals, and that I kind of learned after the fact that was a little bit of a facade, that he wasn't quite doing as well as I thought he was, and I think appearances, he was really, really good at appearances, and it played out even at the crisis level, right, where my brother would sort of threaten to kill himself, and then my mom and I would sort of like, okay, how do we handle this, right? Like, we're going to call some sort of crisis intervention, whether it's to the VA or the state level, and and they would call my brother. My brother would say, I don't know what they're talking about. They're over exaggerating, right? And it's really, really hard to help someone who doesn't want to be helped, right? And so he would sort of like tell us what he was thinking, and then we would react to it, and then we would bring resources into the equation, and he would just say, oh, no, I don't know what they're talking about. They're overreacting. And so that we were on that cycle for a while. Even when I was overseas, my mom would still reach out and say, hey, like your brother, threatened again. How do you want to handle it? And I was like, call the VA, call his buddies. And I would, I'd forward my mom numbers to his friends and try from the other side of the world to like help as much as I could. When I felt things were like, when things like that would happen, I would reach out to him and say, hey, like, how you doing? And he would just pretend like nothing was going on. He's like, oh, mom's overreacting or something like that. And and I had already been on that roller coaster with him for a few years before I went into contracting, so I knew he was lying to me. But it's like one of those things, do I press the issue and have him get pissed off at me over the phone, or do I just take his word for it and kind of let him handle this the way he wants to handle it? It got to the point where, at one point my mom and I were seriously considering, do we have him, do we go through the process of having him like committed by the state, for like a mental health crisis standpoint, behavioral health crisis standpoint. And we had a very, very frank talk, and I said, Mom, if we do that, on the back end of that, he's going to be incredibly angry with us, and he's already demonstrated he's willing to be violent with us. Like, I don't know that that's something we really want to do, and so I kind of talked my mom out of doing that.
Okay, here's the big thing that I want to ask about that, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but did you ever get to a point when you were overseas and had been dealing with this for so long that you just said, fuck it, I don't care. Whatever you're going to do, you're going to do?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, it was I would say it's before I left for contracting. I didn't really feel this way internally, but I told my brother, because like I said, he had threatened kind of over and over and over again. And I can't remember, he said something like, he's like, oh yeah, because he would talk about it so casually, and it was like really frustrating because like, how, it would always, when he would drink, he would talk about killing himself so casually. And one time he said something to, and like, it's something you kind of like sidestep and you try to engage in like a constructive sort of positive way. And he made the comment one time, he's like, when I do it, it's going to be big. Everybody's going to know about it. And I like stopped in my tracks. I turned around. I was like, if you fucking do it, you do it in the privacy of your own home. He's like, don't bring anybody else into your bullshit. And my brother like recoiled at that. And I was like, I'm fed up with this. I was like, I don't know what to do, man. Like you're telling me you're telling me and everybody else in this family you're going to do it, and then you pretend like we're the crazy ones whenever we try to get you help. Like it's maddening. Like you're like, you are grinding this family down in the dust. And I was like, if you do it in the privacy of your own home. And that was like one of the last conversations I had with my brother in person.
Well, I noticed that you said your dad was in Tennessee while your mom was in Arizona. Were they split up at the time?
Oh yeah. They divorced when I was 9, but they always lived close to each other for us kids. When I turned 19 or 20, my dad ended up moving back east. But so they've been divorced since I was 9, and my dad was on the other side of the country for when I was 31, my brother died. So
I want to get back into the, when you talk to your parents about supporting you and stuff, does your dad know what's going on with your brother? Does he have any part in that, or is he kind of a backseat watching it?
I wouldn't say he's a backseat watching. I would say that he didn't like of his own volition put himself in the middle of it. I think we were all at a loss for like how to deal with it. And I think to his credit, my dad would fly out, when he felt like the threats were serious enough. My dad would land in Phoenix, and my brother would just pretend like everything was okay. And so my dad would stick around for a few days, like have some one-on-one time with my brother, like talk to my mom and I about the situation. And I was like, this is what he said, this is what he did, like this is why we called you. And then my dad would be like, okay, well, like let me know if you need me again. So it wasn't like my dad like didn't like react to or try to help. It was that same cycle of like threatening, reacting, and then getting my dad or mental health crisis people involved, or a combination of both, them reacting and then my brother pretending like we were overreacting. And that cycle played out. That would probably happen 2 to 3 times a year for 8 years, and so you get desensitized to it, unfortunately. And I think that's one of the things I carried around after the fact, was I just got so desensitized to it, and eventually, like you said, I was just like, dude, fuck this. I don't know if I can cuss on this podcast, but
I just did, so you absolutely can.
It gets you to a point where you're just I am like so emotionally like taxed by this like roller coaster ride, and like I'm giving my all to this. I mean, I followed the guy into base jumping just so I could build memories. I got into the most dangerous adventure sport in the world just so I can build memories with the guy. So I'm obviously all in on like making this better. But he lets us know that something's wrong, but he's just not willing to like take the step to get the help. And eventually he put himself in a situation he couldn't get out of, and he made the decision to take his own life. And so it was gut wrenching, the whole process, and it was getting the frequency got higher and higher, and the consequences got higher and higher. That's sort of like towards the end of like the last year. It was the last year before I went into contract, and then he put me in the hospital twice.
Can we talk about those 2 times? Just like what led to him and what happened?
I think one time it was his birthday, and we went out. I took him out for his birthday, and he got really drunk. I mean, we were all drinking, but he got really, really drunk. Got into a verbal altercation with one of my friends, who he's just a guy who I went to school with, studied economics with, the younger guy, 21, 22-year-old kid. And he kind of recoiled. He basically my brother and him were talking about something, doesn't really matter what it was, and this guy was particularly knowledgeable about this thing my brother was arguing about, and sort of like made my brother kind of look foolish in front of some people. And then my brother decided to like threaten him, and then that guy brought it to me, and I said, hey, like, what are you doing? Like, we're just having a casual conversation, we're celebrating your birthday, like, let's just relax a little bit. And he just chose to like focus his anger and aggression on me, and turned into a physical fight, and he bit into my face. He bit my lip and nearly bit through it. Like this whole part of my lip was like hanging down, and I had to go to the ER, and had to see a plastic surgeon, and so that was the first time, and then the second time was. Man, it's honestly, it's so dumb that I don't even want to talk about it. But I think it's a good story to kind of illustrate like how, like, where my brother was mentally.
And that was the idea behind it, because I wanted to show, when you and I talked, just how far we went down this rabbit hole before it all ended.
Yeah. So my brother made. It's a ridiculous story. So my brother made chili, and he didn't finish it all. And my brother went out of town for something. I can't remember what it was. And he said that I could finish his chili. So my brother likes his rice and his chili separate. I like my chili and rice mixed. And so I mixed.
I've never had rice with chili.
Oh, it's great. I mean, it's poor kid tricks to make your food stretch.
All right.
And so I made a batch of rice and a batch of chili, mixed it together, and I didn't finish that. And so my brother came home, saw that I had mixed rice with the chili, and he said, "Hey, you mixed rice with my chili?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I don't ever do that." I said, "What are you talking about? You gave it to me." And that he attacked me. Like I was in my underwear. I just gotten out of the shower, and I was actually, I was naked. I just got out of the shower, and my brother like burst into the bathroom door, and I was just like halfway out of the shower. I was like, "What's up, man?" He's like, "You put fucking rice in my chili." And I said, and I laughed. I said, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "You put rice in my chili." And I said, you gave it to me. Like I was gonna finish it today." And he like attacked me, butt naked, wet from a shower. Like we're fighting on the bathroom floor. It was so fast, and he ended up in the tussle. I slipped and hit my head on the toilet and split my head open, and I had to go to the hospital for that. But as I'm looking in the mirror, checking my head, and the head bleeds a lot. So I'm like, I busted my hair, split my head open, and had to get like 7 stitches. And I'm checking it, and I'm like, God damn it, he busted my head open. And he's like punching me as I'm like looking in the mirror, and I'm just like, and he's like punching me in the gash, and like blood is like splattering everywhere. And finally, I put him up against the wall, and I was like, dude, like you are out of control. Like what are you doing? So I had to go to the hospital for that. And so it was like, I told him, I was like, hey man, like you're a recon Marine, you're a martial arts Marine. Like I was a scout sniper. Like we have the ability to fucking kill each other. Like we cannot be fighting like this. And it was pretty clear that he was willing to take the violence to a level that I was never going to take it. And so I knew that I was always going to be on the losing end of it, because he was always willing to go further than I was. Right? I was never going to like hurt my little brother. Sure, like get the best of him, teach him a lesson, sure. To fight like that, to, what's the next step beyond that, right? We're grabbing weapons, like that's the next step. And I was never going to take it there, and he knew I was never going to take it there, and he would always take it that next step to where he knew I wasn't going to go. And it's just like, being the recipient, being his punching bag, essentially. Like I just got fed up with it, and that was a big part of that. Like, fuck you, I'm done with this. And that's part of that guilt.
Okay, and we'll circle back around to that. But when these fights are over, of course, you're in the hospital getting fixed. Is there any? Because I'm trying to point back to the TBI thing. Is there any kind of conscious effort or knowledge on his part, like, hey, I just fucked my brother up. I'm sorry. It got out of control. Is there anything like that, or is it, okay, and just move on with the rest of the day?
No, there was always a sob, like crying, hugging. I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again. Please don't. This is gonna it's gonna be hard for me to even say. My brother had a very big fear of, like, because he knew how he was acting, and he knew that he was like pushing people away. And so and I didn't really put it together at the time. I didn't put it together until afterwards that my brother had a really big fear of being alone. And so I think in the aftermath of those incidents, he was always just like over the top apologetic about it, and crying and hugging, and promising me never do it again. And I think it was almost like a fear that I was like going to like finally physically separate myself from him. And eventually I did. And I knew my brother took that really hard. I made the decision to kind of stick to my guns about like putting some distance between him and me. And I knew that he took that hard, because I kind of felt like I was, when he was, getting in fights at bars, and 10 guys wanted to kick his ass, I was the guy he called to pull him out of that fire. I was the guy that would, when he he was off the rails. I mean, like I was about to tell a story, and then I realized there was like an even crazier story, and I was like, this, like, I could sit here and tell stories about Kenan all night long. But like, I was the guy he always called when he needed something, when he was in a situation he couldn't get out of. on his own. And he knew that I was always going to be there for him. And so when I made the decision not to be there for him, I knew it was going to crush him, and I did it anyway. Because I genuinely felt like I needed to protect myself from him. I mean, he told me he was going to kill me like dozens of times. Dozens of times. Was threatening to kill himself, was threatening to kill me, he was threatening to kill anybody who felt like wronged him. It was a volatile situation.
So I'll go back to that question then. You didn't feel guilty about making the decision to be a contractor over there. Do you regret your decision about separating, or do you know that that was the right thing to do even to this day? Because it is the right thing to do.
You mean separating from the Marine Corps or separating from contracting?
No. Separating away from your brother, cutting that relationship off. Do you regret doing that, or do you know, because you have to know that that was the right decision?
That is a good question. I felt like, I chose to make money, and I chose to be in Afghanistan over like being his punching bag, and like being, and I use that as like an abbreviation, but just being there for him, right? Like, knew that me leaving him physically there was the chance that was going to go really bad, because he wasn't going to have that guy in his corner to like pull him out of his situations. But I was also hopeful that it might be the thing he needs to like grow up a little bit or mature a little bit. I describe that as like, I've never hated being right about something in my entire life. Like, I've never hated being right about something more in my entire life than my decision to like separate myself from my brother. Because if I had been there, would the outcome have been different? Possibly. Would I have put myself in peril to be there for him in that situation? Absolutely. Would that peril be worth having my brother around? I wish he was here.
Yeah. And the only thing I can think of, though, when you say that is, would it be different? Yeah. He could have went through on what he said he was going to do to you. You could not be here. And so that's the sticking point when Hoot called me and told me about the story and then when I talked to you, is that, yeah, you were right. The whole time you were right. You had to do it. It wasn't like well, maybe I can, or maybe no. You just told a story where you were literally checking a gash in your head while he was punching you in that gash. Like, that was a real threat. And you know that from being in the Marine Corps. That is a real credible threat happening. So that's the part of the story where I just have to know, and I want to tell you, you were absolutely right in that decision. I know that it can't go back, but you got to know that.
No, I do. I have enough people that are close to me that have seen sort of like how much of the guilt that I carry, and way too much of it. Like I said, like, I wasn't there, I didn't pull the trigger, but like, I took a lot of responsibility for that for a number of years. And the guys who know me, some of the guys that know me the best, they're just like, dude, like, who knew the whole situation, right? They're just like, dude, like, he's like, I didn't think you were going to make it out of that. And my mom has said that, my dad has said that. He's like, our biggest concern was he was actually going to go through with it, and he was actually one day going to kill you. You hear that, and, sometimes it takes a long time for that to actually like become truth in your mind. And I think a lot of that is just like wanting him to be here still. Cause like for as much bullshit and as much like pain as that guy put me through, like not having that thing to push me all the time to be better at everything all the time. Like, I miss it, like it's there's nobody out there like, hey, your run time's slow, or hey, you're looking like you're putting on 5 pounds, like you should take that off, or hey, you fucked this up or you fucked that up, right? Like, I miss having that, like that built-in sort of, I don't know, like built-in thing to like make me better, right? And I have that inside, for
Yeah,
sure.
but it's always nice to have an outside voice to do it too, because
Yeah,
that gives that extra level.
for sure.
So what do you think it was at the end? And you and I have talked about, we'll kind of talk about the last day that when he killed himself, but in all these times, because you said it went on for 8 years, where he'd say, I'll kill myself, I'll kill you, I'll kill other people, whatever it may be, right? What do you think it was the final thing that made him go through with this? Because he had been not truthful all of these other times. What was it you think that made it happen this time?
He got mixed up with a girl who, from I only met her once after my brother died, but I had heard that she was kind of a manipulator, and I had heard that she had publicly embarrassed him. And public embarrassment to my brother was like sacrilege. Like that's like immediate, like you get dealt with, like public, which is why he like was about to attack that buddy on his birthday, right? Because like my brother said something matter of factly, and my buddy was very like nonchalantly was like, "That's not right," and like in normal conversation that's like not a big deal, but to my brother that's a very big fucking deal. You embarrassed him, or he feels like he's embarrassed. And so I had heard that this girl that he felt very strongly about publicly embarrassed him, and he that was it. It was like he had destroyed all of his other relationships. He had rolled his truck. He was making some really, really poor financial decisions, living way beyond his means. So I think he was kind of digging himself into a debt hole. So he was a lot of financial stress in his life. And I think that was just like the final thing. And he was just like, I'm done. I just don't want to deal with it anymore. And so it seems like a super silly thing to be the final straw, but I guess everybody has one, right? I guess, I've tried to put myself in his head and sort of like try to understand sort of like what life was like through his eyes. And it was just like constant anger and constant rage and constant like needing to, be like the most, important, the most interesting guy in the room, and like it feels fucking exhausting. And so I think it's just like running at just like redlining for almost a decade, while at the same time sort of pushing all your most important relationships away. And so in a time of like crisis, there's nobody there who's going to pick up the phone, because you've like destroyed all your relationships, I think.
Well, you weren't talking to him. Was your mom talking to him?
Yeah. My mom was talking to him, but I think the
But
story
it's a very
goes,
small circle.
yeah, I think the story goes that like I said, there's some details in this that I'd rather like avoid, but my mom was, because my brother was 17 at the time. My youngest brother, who was
Your
still, or
youngest brother,
maybe he
yeah.
was 18, but hadn't graduated college or hasn't graduated high school. He was still at the house. I know that. I think he was 18. And, my mom, I guess, like, just didn't answer the phone that night. Just like really, because there was a pattern of like my brother calling my mom late at night when he was drunk. And sometimes he'd show up at the house, and my mom would feel like she would need to protect my youngest brother. And so my mom just kind of describes it as just like being exhausted. And like she saw his call come through, and she's just like, I'm not answering this call, And there's a reason for that. It's certainly justified.
100%.
Yeah, but then that was like, don't know what the contents of that call were going to be, but that was the night he ended up killing himself. But I think he felt incredibly enraged. I think he felt incredibly alone. Yeah.
So you get the phone call. Can we walk through it?
Yeah, so I get the phone call. Luckily, my old corpsman from the Marine Corps was on contract with me. So I had one of my best friends was on contract with me, and so I got the call immediately. Kind of was trying to keep it together, while I was there, and then I find my way to my buddy's room, open the door. And we're like, every time I open the door, it's like joking and like just like shooting the shit. And I open the door, and he can see the look on my face. And he's like, holy shit, what's going on? And I said, he knows my brother. And I said, oh, Kieran killed himself. And I just like kind of collapsed in his arms. And, he kind of like held me close for a while, and he's like, "What are you gonna do?" And I was like, "I'm getting the fuck out of here." So I made arrangements to go home, showed up, and I asked my mom some of the details over the phone, and my mom was like, "This is a kind of an in-person conversation. I don't want to tell you this over the phone." And showed up, and there was a bunch of family there at the house, and my mom pulled me into a back room and kind of told me the whole story, and I was just like, "Holy shit, that's wild." And uh, man, it's and I, all my plans that I had put, all this thing that I was working towards, I kind of put everything on pause, and kind of just started, base jumping and partying, and I kind of was just like looking for some sort of catharsis, and just wrestling with just like I kind of got it though, like during that time, like something that's so fucking painful that you just would do anything to like make the pain go away. I had never had and I wouldn't necessarily call it like a full on suicidal ideation. Like I wasn't like planning it or anything, but I definitely like had the thought, in the months after that, I was just like, I just want this to, no, I just don't want to feel this way, and I can make it I can make it so I don't feel this way anymore. And then you kind of you have that thought, and you're just like, well, how would you do it? Like, and kind of like, you start having this like a very casual, like internal dialogue, and you get several minutes into that, and you're just like, whoa, you kind of, at least for me, I kind of shake my head and be like, whoa, like, why, like, how did you, like, you were like so comfortable with having that like thought stream, and I had like a couple of those, and over the next year, probably had like a, kind of a thought stream like that, like probably 2 or 3 times. And that was the first time I had like ever sort of experienced a suicidal ideation. And so I was just like, okay, like I know that base jumping makes me happy. I know that traveling makes me happy. Luckily I had gotten myself into a financial position where I didn't really like, I wasn't bringing in like tons of money, but I didn't have to work. Right. I kind of put my relationship with my now wife on pause, and I was like, I just need to like go and live out of my truck and go into the desert on walkabout and like jump off cliffs. Did that for probably a year, and a little over a year, and then I made the decision that I wanted to start a life with my now wife, and I ended up moving to Pittsburgh and went to grad school here.
Were you angry at your brother?
I was so angry at my brother.
Like when you got the call, were you angry?
No, I was incredibly sad. It was when I learned the details of my brother's death, I became very angry at him.
Okay.
Because there was a very high level of like potential criminality involved with like his final day on Earth. And so started learning the details of that were very I was very angry with him for a very long time. And I think that prevented me from kind of getting over some stuff, kind of dealing with it. It was just easier to be angry with him, and easier to brush it off as like, he's an asshole, or he's he's this or that, kind of thinking negatively of him. And, that who he was in his like final 8 years of life was not the guy that I grew up with. It was a very, very different person. And, even in those, when he was like joined the Marine Corps, it really wasn't until, I think the long-term effects of his like traumatic brain injury and his unwillingness to get help, and his need to, always be a braggart, kind of all snowballed on themselves, and he kind of basically got himself into a situation he, felt like he couldn't get out of. I was very angry at him. I was very, very angry at him. Like the whole thing, like putting our family through that, putting my little brother through that. My little brother idolizes my brother and I, and, for him to like, to put my little brother through that, I was very, very angry with him. And, I was angry with him for a while. And then, the anger kind of like gives way to just like intense sadness and grief. And it was kind of a smorgasbord of sort of real toxic, real self-destructive emotions that were kind of living rent-free in my head for a number of years.
How do you finally forgive and move on? Because now we're moving into 22 jumps, but what's the catalyst? What's that match point that makes you move on?
I don't think we're like, um, I think for me, I kind of saw some of the things that made my brother so unhappy, like destroying relationships, and I kind of saw it kind of emerging in me, just in the way that I was handling his death. The first couple of years after my brother's suicide, like I was very, very selfish in sort of how I handled that. This woman that I'm now married to, who's absolutely wonderful, kind of stuck with me through all those years, and stuck with me through my brother's suicide. And I just like was very flippant with that relationship. And I was like, I'm gonna go do this. I'm gonna go on walkabout, do a vision quest for an undetermined amount of time, and I was putting a lot of pressure, putting a lot of stress on that relationship, and, arguably the most important relationship in my life. And so I made the decision that I needed to kind of separate myself from, because it was very easy to just base jump in Arizona, right? It's just like, it's everywhere, it's very easy to convince yourself to just like, oh, just go get a jump in, not think about the thing that's really bothering me. But it really was my move to Pittsburgh that kind of forced me to actually deal with it and wrangle with it, because I didn't have easy access to base jumping. I had like separated myself from my, like, all my friends and family, and it was sort of an intentional thing. I think I knew I needed to actually like really wrestle with it and figure out my place in it, and figure out kind of what to take with me, what to leave behind, and kind of make peace with the whole thing. And kind of moving to a different environment where I didn't have access to like the recreational outlets that I always had. Easy. There's a lot of good base jumping around here, but it's different. Really kind of forced me to kind of wrestle with it and deal with it, and realize that my brother he had a massive traumatic brain injury, and an all but untreated traumatic brain injury. And that, it wasn't necessarily, yes, they were his actions that he did, but he essentially, his brain was like forever altered, right? And so like the things that I sort of laid at his feet and were kind of like, this is your fault that you did this. This is all on you. Like that still is true, but it's like, something happened to you that wasn't your fault, that is contributing to this behavior, and that is not your fault. And so I think giving him, kind of letting go of that allowed me to kind of let go of my anger about the whole thing. And once I let go of the anger is when I was able to like kind of look at it through sort of an objective lens. And that's when I got really interested in supporting traumatic brain injury research.
Okay. I think we need to point out before we get into 22 jumps, there's two programs that you've taken part in, the Enrich and the Adept program. Is that correct?
Yeah. So those are both multi-year DoD funded traumatic brain injury research. One is, so Enrich, I've been involved with the longest as a consultant and a co-lead on the project. It's essentially it's a kind of a two-part program, kind of three parts, two major parts. So it's essentially a policy overhaul of how the DoD identifies, categorizes, and treats the long-term effects of traumatic brain injuries. I think there's a lot of evidence coming out that, just because the physical injuries of a traumatic brain injury heal, quote unquote, that there are long tail effects of those traumatic brain injuries that are sort of invisible, and they kind of manifest through, behavioral issues or substance abuse, or combination thereof. And then the second part of that study is to actually stand up the DoD's first brain bank. So service members and veterans who have a history of traumatic brain injury can actually self-select to donate their brain to the brain bank to improve neuroimaging, identifying some of the very difficult to detect physical effects of traumatic brain injury that current imaging can't really pick up in the living. So the theory behind that is that if we can have brains donated by service members and veterans at the end of life with known traumatic brain injury, then it'll improve the ability to detect some of those physical anomalies, some of those physical changes in the brain in those who are still living, so that we can actually detect traumatic brain injuries, while the patient is still alive.
Is there any, as of right now, I know that they're working towards it, but is there any treatment for a TBI? You know how we talked about just now where we can see that in veterans that have passed on and we're able to detect it now in people that are still living. Is there a treatment plan in place, or is it being formulated to really attack these TBIs like they've never been attacked before?
I would say there isn't like an overall protocol for traumatic brain injuries. It kind of depends on what the mechanism of injury is and sort of, the set and setting in which it occurs, right? So sports and like repetitive head injuries from like football players, right? That's like that's called I can't remember the long name for it, but it's CTE. And what that is like a buildup of like almost like scar tissue, because like it's not a muscle, so it's not true scar tissue, but it formulates as a plaque around some of the neural pathways in the brain and some of the major structures of the brain, and it actually like eventually over time it kind of shrinks the overall size of the brain. More often in service members and law enforcement, you're seeing the injuries occur from like typically one time big hit, right? A concussive hit from like overpressure from a blast, or a car accident, things like that. Those injuries, a lot of times the axons in the brain, though, essentially like the brain will kind of twist in the cranium vault, and those axons will sort of like snap and twist as the brain sort of jostles around in the cranial vault. So, and there's lots of permutations of that sort of in between those two sort of primary injuries, the types of injuries. There are a lot of like experimental treatments for that. Like I know a friend of mine went through, I think, a pretty intensive like 30-day hyperbaric chamber treatment to increase red cell blood flow in the brain. He had a lot of really good outcomes for that. I know guys are kind of experimenting. I think the evidence is there. It's not legal in the United States, but I think people are using kind of plant medicine treatments to address some of the sort of behavioral and sort of like mental health aspects of a traumatic brain injury. But in terms of physical injuries, there's not a ton that is out there to treat the actual physical injury. I think we're kind of in the nascent stages of figuring out how to truly treat the physical injuries of the brain. And obviously, if there's like a big concussive force and there's bleeding in the brain, you have a hematoma, they can drain that, they can do things to heal physical injuries, but the long-term sort of micro injuries from a traumatic brain injury are much, much harder to address because you can't see them. If you can't see it, if you can't detect it, and then it's a really hard thing to treat. And one of the things that 22 Jumps supports through our research support is actually the identification of biomarkers in the blood that are indicative of a long-term traumatic brain injury. So the theory is that there are certain, combination, like molecular structures, like almost like proto-molecular structures, like within the blood, it's kind of a collective term of them is biochemicals. So elevated levels of certain biochemicals in the blood is indicative of sort of like a long-term effect of a traumatic brain injury. And so the field is still very wide open. They haven't really keyed in on, what those biochemicals are and whether it's directly related, but there's a lot of promise in that area of research too. So, to answer your question more succinctly, outside of the immediate physical injuries, treatments for the long-term effects of traumatic brain injury at the physical level is pretty difficult.
Well, let's talk about 22 Jumps, because you guys have raised, I think, over $400,000 at different fundraisers. I told you Hoot got a hold of me, and said that I don't think he's ever had a better time in his life than when he went on this last retreat with you. So let's talk about what you guys do, some of the events that you do, and then the fundraising you do.
Yeah, so maybe a little like a history of 22 jumps. It would kind of be appropriate to kind of set the stage. Like I said, my brother and I got into base jumping together, and when he died, he left me some of his base jumping gear. There's actually a kind of a funny story in there. If we have time, I'll tell you about it. Funny to me now. At the time, my friend thought I was crazy. But so anyway, so I was kind of like I said, I was kind of going through this like process of healing, and really I got that altruism sort of popped up in me, and it's like, okay, I'm kind of sick of not doing anything. I'm sick of feeling bad. I'm sick of feeling bad about this, and it was a realization in that healing process that like these feelings of loss and these feelings of like having my brother not be around anymore, that they're not ever going to go away. This is like a part of my life now. And so it's like, what do I do with this, right? Do I just like sit around feeling sorry for myself, or like, do I use this as like a force for good? And so, I, from Phoenix, like I said, and, we have a mountain right in the middle of Phoenix called Camelback, and Camelback Mountain. And there's a couple of base jumps off it. One of them is safe and safe-ish for base jumping, safe for base jumping. A buddy of mine who I was in 2-1 with, he reached out to me the year before, and he wanted to do 22 jumps in Moab, or 22 jumps in Moab for Veterans Day, in honor of the 22 veterans who commit suicide that day. And logistically, it didn't really come together, and I had the thought, I was like, oh, I can do that same event right here in Phoenix, right in the middle of the fifth biggest city in the country, and had a really modest fundraising goal. And I identified the organization that I wanted to support, and I think my fundraising goal was $2,200, and we didn't have a website or anything. It was just like word of mouth, and I set up like a little Facebook fundraiser page, and I ended up raising like $25,000, and that was pretty shocking. I certainly didn't expect to raise that much, and then I did it again the next year, and we raised like close to $40,000, and I was like, oh, okay, like maybe this is the thing. Maybe we should like add some structure to this and make it an actual organization. And so we had been running the fundraising events. We had since expanded the fundraising footprint to Idaho as well. So we incorporated in 2022, and so we have now the current sort of cadence of the organization is that we have a fundraising event in Arizona the beginning of February. We have a fundraising event in Idaho over Memorial Day weekend, and then we have a fundraising event in West Virginia in the third Saturday in October. And those fund two separate buckets. One of them is our research bucket. We have consult on traumatic brain injury research studies, like the two that you just described. But we also have a portfolio of research, of traumatic brain injury research, that we also fund that's managed by a large research institution. And that portfolio of research is actually named after my brother, the Kieran Wimmer Traumatic Brain Injury Initiative. And then the other bucket are the retreats. So funny story about the retreats. They, a really good buddy of mine who's actually on the board of 22 Jumps, he's not a base jumper, not a military guy, he's an investment banker. And he said, with you kind of, because we don't pay anybody at 22 Jumps. We're all volunteers. So we haven't taken a dime out of the organization for ourselves, which I think makes us very different from a lot of other nonprofits. And he said, by you just kind of handing all your money to this research institution, you guys are kind of a pass-through entity. Why wouldn't they just donate directly to that research institution? And I was like, that's a good point. I don't know why they would, right? And so I had a friend of mine who lives in Moab reach out to me about a potential putting on an event in Moab, sort of a retreat style event. And 2023 last year was our very first event doing that. And we had amazing vendors come out of the woodwork to support rope swinging, highlining, canyoneering, helicopter tours, rock crawling, tandem base jumps, tandem skydives. And we integrate a breathwork clinic into that, which is like a pretty powerful sort of non-pharmacological modality for kind of I can't remember what it's called, but it's pretty impactful. It's pretty impressive stuff. I was pretty skeptical of it at first. And then we also have a focus group that we collect IRB approved research, actually working towards a larger study of our own, validating adventure sports as a as a viable therapeutic modality for suicide prevention, specifically around depression, anxiety, and PTSD. So those are our 3 fundraising events, and the fundraising events kind of fund those 2 buckets. The retreat being our sort of direct outreach programming, and that's the retreat that Hoot went on this year. We had our 2nd annual retreat over Veterans Day weekend this year.
So how do people get involved in it, whether they want to take part in the retreats, whether they want to take part in the research, giving the money? How does all that work and break down for you guys?
We're always taking volunteers. If you go to the website, 22jumps.org, and you go to events, there is a volunteer intake form. Depending on what event it is, we always need packed meals. We need just cheerleaders. If you're not a base jumper, it's a little difficult to help with like the actual jump operations, because it's a lot of packing and a lot of hiking. But like the packing operations are the biggest part of the operations. But there's a lot of peripheral things that we need help on sort of every event. If you want to donate, that same website, 22jumps.org/donate. We're it's a grassroots fundraising effort. I think 75% of all donations have come from sort of small number, like individual donors. We have some sponsorships that give larger sums of money, but like I said, I think we've raised just shy of like $500,000. I think like $460,000 at this point, and I think the lion's share of that has been sort of individual donors, which is a very difficult way to fundraise, but it also is very very heartwarming that that many individuals see value in what we do. So,
all right, where can people find you? I know we've talked about 22 Jumps, but of course include that in there. But where can people find you, find out more about your story?
22 Jumps lays that out pretty well. There's an about section there if you want to learn more about like my brother and sort of the founding of 22 Jumps. Tristan, Wimmer. There are not that many of us in the world. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Facebook. I'm not really active on any other platforms. I think I do have a Twitter account. I never use it. But yeah, if you we have a lot of really good ideas that come to the organization, and how we can get funding and sort of some programming ideas. And so if you want to reach out to me, personally, I kind of always leave the door open for anybody who identifies sort of parallels in my story and my brother's story and sort of what's going on in their lives. I do leave that door open if people want to reach out and sort of bounce things off of me. I'm not a mental health professional, but I certainly have a big heart, and I'm willing to like have a conversation and kind of point you in the right direction if need be. But yeah, that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Instagram, they got to go check that out. There's so many videos and photos on there of the events and stuff. So, and of course I'll put some up because Hoot has sent me a bunch of them. You make sure, and let's do the Instagram one more time just so they can see the videos.
Yeah, so it's on Instagram, it's 22 Jumps Project. Everything else is on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. It's just 22 Jumps, but on Instagram it's 22 Jumps Project. Yeah, go check it out. It's cool. It's pretty cool. Like I said, I'm not really like a braggadocious person, but you're definitely like looking back in the Instagram and seeing how far we've come. It's pretty cool what these retreat participants get to. Yeah.
Amazing story, amazing organization. Guys, we're going to kind of wrap this up. You know where you can find Tristan because we've talked about it. Let's talk about where you can find me. As always, you can find me on Instagram at the DTD_podcast. You can find me on Facebook at the DTD podcast. You can find me on YouTube at the DTD podcast, where all these videos are in video form, I guess you would say. And you can check it out, the whole story, uncut or clips on there. We've also just kind of joined TikTok and we're checking it out. We're putting a couple clips out there, but mostly you're going to want to find us at YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and then your one-stop shop, dtdpodcast.net. That's where you're going to find everything: audio, video, pictures of Tristan, pictures of the event, ways that you can contact him, all the links that are available to him. Make sure that you stop by. Everyone that makes this show happen, the guys that are really putting it out there. Let's start with Max Belts. My buddy Max Alexander over there, the toughest leather belts on earth. Make sure you go by there, check that out, pick up a belt from him. You will not be unsatisfied with it, whether it's for dress, whether it's for casual, the range, whatever it is. I wear one every day, maxbelts.com. Make sure you stop by Derek Minson's place over there at Trident Coffee. They're the best cold brew coffee guys in the world. DTD 15 will get you 15% off your order. And always make sure you check hatchetbrewing.com. Make sure you stop by there, pick up their swag. Retired Green Beret down there in Fort Bragg, right outside in Southern Pines. Amazing locations that he's got. Make sure you go check them out. Greg Walker, my buddy down there. Guys, that's going to be it for this show. That's Tristan. I'm DJ. Make sure you check us out on the next one. We'll see you. We're out of here.